record on this computer. All right, we're recording. We're live. It's Wednesday evening. We have a fascinating parasha to jump into. We have a full class. I count here already 27 participants. That's a beautiful thing. Just to say that outright, that 27 different screens, and there are more people than that who are logging in, want to take some time to learn some Torah on a Wednesday night and participate in a Torah discussion is beautiful and really special. So I'm happy to be a part of it. And it's a big moment for me because this is my first moment of really diving into the Torah with all of you and the first of many. So I'm excited to have this opportunity tonight. The content of this class, and we'll go each Wednesday at this time, week by week, is going to be a deep dive into the weekly Torah portion. And what I mean by that, when I say deep dive, is we're not just going to get a basic understanding of the story. We're really going to look into the text with the goal of finding ourselves in it, seeing the ways in which and the places in which the Torah speaks to our own lives, our own situations, the complications of our lives, the complexity of our lives. My starting place for studying Torah, and I like to say this early on, is that the Torah is not a historical document. We're not reading stories of what happened to our ancestors thousands of years ago. It's that, but it's so much more than history. It's a text which invites us to ask the deepest questions about our own lives as well, and to learn what animates us in our spiritual lives. So we have a fascinating story for this evening. We have a story that defines who we are as a people. Does anyone know, just offhand, to jump in, where in the weekly reading cycle we are? What story, which of the patriarchs we've been learning about through these weeks, and where we are now, before we jump into the text? And feel free, that way you can practice unmuting yourself or just raising a hand. I don't know everyone yet, so you'll have to say your name.
Jacob.
Who said it?
I did.
Is that Sheila?
Yep.
Great, good to see you. It was good to talk the other day. We're learning the story of Jacob, the third patriarch, and where we left off from the last few weeks is an incredible position of conflict. Jacob, perhaps more than any of the other patriarchs, lived a life that was filled with turmoil and struggle and issues. What's the struggle that's at the center of Jacob's life? We're going to jump into the text and see where that left us. It's the relationship that he had with his brother Esau. The last that Jacob spoke to his brother Esau, what had happened? There was a death threat involved. Just to refresh your memories about the story, Jacob, a twin of Esau, had stolen the birthright, had stolen the blessing that you might argue belonged to Esau to begin with. And the last that they spoke to each other, Esau turns to Jacob and says, buddy, you better get out of here or you're finished. I'm going to kill you. It's going to get violent. And Jacob, our third patriarch, through his life, had to live with that conflict and that sense that perhaps he had wronged his brother, that perhaps what he had done to his brother way back when they were kids was not exactly the right thing to do. And that's where we lead into this week. It's the week in which, after years and years of not seeing each other, not speaking, Jacob and Esau are ready to meet again. And there's a question. What's going to happen when they come face to face again? Is it going to be violence? Is it going to be anger? Is it going to be conflict? Or the opposite? Is it going to be a beautiful moment, a moment of forgiveness and reconciliation and love and understanding? And that way, it's really a story that teaches us a lot about forgiveness and about making amends with the people we've harmed. And something very important happens along the way. So let's jump into the text. Any questions before we start really about that setup, about the context of where we are in the Torah up until now?
Uh,
Anybody? Is that Naomi?
yes. I don't think that there is really any indication that Jacob had any of those thoughts about maybe he did the wrong thing during all those years, more than 20 years that he spent with Laban, in exile. But it's true that, we are left without knowing what is going to happen. But I mean, I think that's mere speculation that he ever had any thoughts that he had done anything wrong. I don't.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let me jump on that for a second. The question that we have to wrestle with when we speak about Jacob's life is that question. Is he a changed man when we get to this Torah portion? Did he look back on those actions and say, that was not how I should have acted? And now at this moment, grappling with all of that and perhaps growing as a person, he realizes that he needs to be better and so he can fully live up to his calling as a patriarch? Or is it, as you suggested, maybe he's still the same old Jacob, the same guy who played tricks from the beginning, who was a little bit of a troublemaker from the beginning? Is he still that, and does he keep that with him through life? We'll see that one of the indications that Jacob is changed is that his name changes. And a name change in Bereshit, name change in the book of Genesis, signifies that there has been a transformation. Now, what's interesting about Jacob, and we're going to see it as we get into the text, is that Jacob is the only character who has both of his names used. Jacob, his first name, and Yisrael, his given name later on. And the question is, well, if he's really made a transformation, how come we don't only call him by that new name? It seems that he goes back and forth through life, but a really important point. So I thank you for that, Naomi. Let's get into the text. Can everyone see okay? Everyone can see the Hebrew of the text? So I'm going to take us through using the Hebrew. If you don't have experience studying the Torah text in Hebrew, good. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to move slowly and of course take questions, but I like to include the Hebrew because so much gets lost when we just leave it out. I once had a professor tell me that studying Torah only in English without the Hebrew is like trying to kiss someone through a glass. Yes, you kind of get a sense of what it would be like, but it's not intimate, not the same level of love.
Well, you're also you're relying on somebody else's interpretation or translation of the Hebrew,
Right.
which may not be yours and may not be accurate. We don't know.
Many times it's not, and we'll see. Many times the text that we get off the internet is a bit of an interpretation. So first verse in this week's Parsha, and we'll get into a lot of what I just spoke about in the context, and of course the big moment where Jacob's name is changed and he's ready to see Esav again. Here's how it starts. What's the name of the portion? Vayishlach. Vayishlach. And the name of a portion is usually taken from the first couple of words in the first verse, and that is the case here. Vayishlach Yaakov melachim lefanav. Jacob sent before him messengers. Now, you might have heard that word malachim in another context. Has anyone heard that word malachim?
Angels.
Kings.
No. Kings.
Kings.
Kings are melech, but we also say, like on Friday night when we sing Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet. What are we singing about there?
Angels.
Angels.
There is a real connection in the Torah between the concept of angels and messengers. In fact, it's the same word, because the belief in the Torah is that angels are messengers sent by God to either complete a mission or to deliver a message. this is an example of foreshadowing, because later on in this story, which we'll see, who comes to Jacob when his name is changed? An angel. And so we get this sense that there's going to be something about angels happening later on. And I just want to remind everyone, by the way, when the Torah speaks about angels, this is really, really beautiful. It always describes them as if they were like people. They're closer to people than anything else. And the idea, I think, for us is an important one, that there are people in this world who are like angels, who come to deliver us a message that we need to hear at the right time, and they do. And they serve that purpose of being almost angels in our world. And the Torah really gets at both of those concepts. So let's see, Jacob is sending messengers out to Esav, El Esav Achiv. Why? Why is he sending out messengers? What does he want Esav to know? Okay, we'll see, and then we'll discuss. He instructed those messengers to say, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esav, thus shall you say la Adoni le Esav, ko amar avdecha Yaakov." This is what your servant Jacob says. Your servant who has been with Lavan until now. Now, he's going to give his message that he has gifts to give to Esav in the hopes that Esav will forgive him. But what do you notice is a little bit striking about this verse in the way that Jacob describes himself and the way Jacob describes Esav? When he's saying, Esav Adoni, my master, and I am Avdecha, your servant. What's strange about that?
If he has the blessing from his father, he should be the Lord, and the other one should be Esau should be the servant. But it seems he's taking a higher road.
Who said that? I don't have
Carolyn Newman.
Carolyn Newman. That's, I think, the crux of the matter. The entire fight between Jacob and Esav is about one thing. Who's the master and who's the servant? Who's stronger and who's weaker? Who's the firstborn and who's the secondborn? Who deserves the blessing and who doesn't deserve the blessing? Their entire life as twins, they've been in competition. And remember, Esav was born first, and so he was deserving really of the blessing and the birthright. Jacob was born holding on to his heel as if to say, no, give it to me, it's mine. The word name Yaakov means heel, because Jacob was born literally pulling Esav down. And his whole life, Jacob fought so that he would be considered the top, the head honcho. And here in this moment of trying to reconcile and trying to make amends, he describes himself as the servant and Esav as the master. Now, my question for you, is this authentic? Is this a case of someone who has really humbled himself and has really wanted to take, as was just mentioned, the moral high road? Or is he just saying what he knows he has to say in order to get his way, in order to get Esav to forgive him? It's like when you go, you say you harm somebody, you go and you want them to forgive you. It would be like you saying, I'm the worst. I'm so bad. I can't believe I did that. I'm so horrible and you're the best. You're so great. And please, please forgive me. Is that the inflection here? Or has Jacob really grown? What do you think?
I think that he's just frightened at returning to this place after so many years, and he doesn't know what to expect, and he's going to play this game. I don't think that we really have any indication which way. We have no indication that he's changed. He knows that he's made he's asked God to protect him. He had some and God says you got to go, so he's going, but he's still a little afraid.
We have in Naomi almost, I don't want to say this to bug you, but someone who's not so sure about Jacob's character, who's not really willing to always give him the benefit of that, and that's fine. It's ambiguous in the text itself.
Well, it also
Many of
makes
our-
it more powerful to think that he will have changed in the future. It also gives us hope that man can change.
well,
That's
nice.
that's a secondary thought. But yes, you're absolutely right. We have no indication that he's really
Nice.
made any reversal
don't-
at this
we
point in the
don't-
text.
We don't get tone in the Torah text, and we don't get punctuation in the Torah text. If we had exclamation points, if we had question marks, if we had italics and bold in the script of the Torah, it would make our job of interpreting the emotion behind these words a lot easier, but it's left open. But it's
Wait,
left
wait, wait.
open.
Rabbi,
Who's that?
Wendy Marks.
Yeah, sure. And then I want to get into the next verse. Wendy.
Okay, but listen.
Yeah.
Not that I'm so chacham, but I've been learning trope with canted chest.
Yes, thank
And
you.
I look at the phrase ha-omron ladoni le'esav. So that's an etnaka, which is a pause. So maybe he is pausing to say, I'm humble to my Lord. I mean, you just made a comment about not having punctuation.
Nice.
But maybe
very nice.
isn't that what the trope?
Let
Can't we
me
read that into the
explain.
trope? I'm just throwing it out there.
Let me explain Wendy's very important point, because she caught me moving too quickly and not getting into the full picture. And time is flying and there's a lot more to look at. But I do want to explain what Wendy just said because it's beautiful. We don't get punctuation in the Torah text, but what we do get is musical notation. And here we can sing the verse, and maybe in singing it, based on the Torah trope, we'll get a sense. And it's true, many interpreters do use the trope, how it's sung, as a way of understanding a deeper meaning. Ladoni leisav ko amar avdecha Yaakov im lavan garti. And if there's a pause there, you might say, I consider that to be a pause of humility and a pause of Jacob really lowering himself and really saying, I'm ready to repent. I want Esau to truly forgive me. This isn't fake. This isn't fake, a fake apology. Okay, so I'll take that. Let's get into the story a little bit more, unless there are any other points on that idea.
I think the fact that the angel was sent, to me, it suggests that he had the support of higher powers and he could mean both. He knows how to be diplomatic and he wants to get what he wants.
So maybe there's that middle ground understanding of Esau. On the one hand, of Yaakov. Yaakov is considered to be the clever one. And there is that sense in which he's able to be clever and use his insight to get what he wants. But on the other hand, he is, after all, the third patriarch. And we would like him to have some integrity, some deeper sense of what's right and wrong. If this is the patriarch who we speak about when we pray our Amidah, if this is the patriarch that gave us the 12 tribes and the entire Jewish people came from Yaakov, we want him to have some integrity. Okay, let's see what he does. Vayihili shor v'chamor tzon ve'eved v'shivcha. I've acquired, Jacob says, a lot. I've gotten rich over these years. I've acquired cattle and sheep, servants. And he's saying, I send this message to Adoni, my Lord, meaning Esav, limtso chen be'enecha, to find grace in your eyes. Meaning, the last time we spoke, you wanted to kill me because I stole your birthright and I stole what belonged to you. Now I'm ready to make peace. I have these gifts that I'm going to send, and I want to find chen. I want to find grace in your eyes. What is the concept of grace religiously? We don't really use that word so much in Judaism. It's used more in Christianity, but what is grace? What is this grace that Jacob is looking for? I think it's a recognition on Esav's part that even though Jacob did the wrong thing, he can still forgive. He can still let go of that animosity and let go of that resentment. And they can be brothers after all those years. Now, the question that this leaves us with as people who have had conflict in our lives, all of us, and as people who do carry resentments, I don't think there's a single person on this planet who doesn't carry some resentment or hold on to something. Some of us do it for weeks, some of us do it for years, or in this case, a lifetime. How do we begin to soften that? How do we begin to have the grace to let go of a little bit of that anger, especially after it's been many years, and try to see the other person who harmed us not as wicked, but as a person who made a mistake?
Hey,
And begin to cultivate some of that forgiveness that Jacob wants Esav to have.
Well, but you can look at grace from the other hand. Somebody who is asking for grace is saying in essence that you can bestow this favor upon me, which I really don't deserve. I think that's a concept of another concept of grace.
Grace is forgiveness undeserved. Other thoughts, though, about what I just mentioned. How do we cultivate that in our own lives? How do we, and there's a lot of wisdom in this class, there are 20-something people here. How do we begin to soften some of those grudges that we might hold against maybe a family member, maybe a coworker, maybe a friend? You know, it says in the Torah, in the verse that says you shall love your neighbor as yourself, before that, it says, don't hold grudges and don't take vengeance. And that's nice to say, but how do we do that work spiritually? Does anyone have any wisdom around that? I'm always learning. Any advice?
Rabbi?
Yeah. Who is that?
Oh, she just went.
Wendy, unmute yourself.
Oh, it's Wendy.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Listen, Rabbi, if you if you have the answer, anybody here in this class has the answer, let's apply it to our country. Talk about grace. You know, I'm not allowed to talk politics.
Come on.
Richard's telling me not to.
No.
Listen, it's very key because we have to accept grace of others we have to love our neighbor as ourselves, especially in this country now. It's key. It's key if we want to have peace. We have to pretend we walk in their shoes.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge it because reading the story of Jacob and Esav now in the aftermath of a contentious election and in a time when our country does feel to be very divided, and there have been a lot of stories. I'm sure you've heard stories of family members who disagree politically, who are not talking to each other. I'm sure after Thanksgiving, there were a lot of potentially heated conversations, even if they happened over Zoom, they still happened. And that question that's raised by this Torah portion, how do family members who completely disagree and are in conflict learn how to love each other again and forgive each other? It feels, Wendy, you're right. It feels like a very timely concept for the Torah to be discussing. There's no question. Let me just say this without getting too deep into it. It's true. I'm not going to give you a spoiler, but the end of this story, they do make up. Esav and Jacob cry, they embrace, they kiss, and it's one of the most beautiful moments of forgiveness ever recounted in human history. It is absolutely beautiful to see these brothers forgive each other and come back together. That's on the one hand, but also it's the last time they speak. Even though they have that moment of forgiveness, it's the last time they're together. And the Torah seems to be honoring almost two things. Honoring, yes, the reality that it's important for us to find the humility to forgive each other, to see the humanity in each other, one, but also that doesn't mean that we have to spend all our time being with someone we totally disagree with, or somebody who we completely, who fills us with a frustration based on their beliefs. The fact that Jacob and Esav forgive each other and then part ways, I think is healthy. That's all I want to say about that for now.
A question that comes up to my mind with this and actually Thanksgiving weekend
Yeah.
is there forgiveness in fact, or is there just acceptance on the one hand and understanding without the forgiveness?
Yeah. So we're not going to see that scene in the Torah where the forgiveness actually takes place. I want to show you Jacob wrestling with the angel and his transformation instead of that. But it's interesting, the words that we use for forgiveness, slicha or mechila, those words that should be familiar if you know the Yom Kippur liturgy, they don't make an appearance there. What we see are much more verbs, actions, that the brothers cry and that they kiss. And it seems to be less on the emotional and intellectual and much more just on the visceral of them embracing and being together. So your question is a good one. We'd have to look at that section a little bit, I think, more in detail to see if we can find some hints. We won't get there now, but maybe in another class. Any other thoughts? And then we'll go a little deeper. All right, I'm glad that came up. It was, in a way, the elephant in the room talking about reconciliation and forgiveness. It's there. It's on everyone's mind. Okay, here's what happens. Up until now, Jacob sent these messengers to let Esav know he has gifts. He wants to potentially make amends, to make things right. He's called Esav my master. I'm your servant. I've humbled myself. The messengers come back to Jacob. Vayishuvu hamalachim el Yaakov lemor, and here's what they say. Banu el achicha, we went to your brother, el Esav, to Esav. V'gam holech likratcha, and he was coming to see you. Just as you were coming to greet him and make amends, he also was coming to you. Here's the difference. Ve'arba me'ot ishimo, he has 400 men with him, and not just any men, soldiers. And so if you think you're coming to Esav with your gifts to make things right, sorry, Jacob, he's coming to you with an army, and he means business. And that's the drama of this moment. And someone mentioned Jacob's fear. That's the very first word of the next verse. Vayira Yaakov me'od. Maybe you've heard this word yira. We talk about yirat Hashem, a fear of God. Yira is a deep, deep fear. And when the Torah says me'od, me'od just means very. It really is almost like using an exclamation point in the Torah. Jacob is afraid for his life in this moment. He thinks there's a real possibility that Esav could come with this army, and that would be it. That his hope that they would forgive each other is all for naught, and that he's going to end up in big trouble. So what does Jacob do? And then I'll take you to the moment of transformation. He does something very smart. Vayetzer lo, vayachatz et ha'am asher ito. He divides his camp in two. He's got all his family with him, everything, all his possessions. He divides it in two. Why would he do that? From a tactical point of view, if you're Jacob, you think there's an army coming, why do you divide everything you have and send half there and half there? What do you think?
Well, that if there's going to be an attack, maybe they'll go to one herd of people, and the other people can escape.
Why, if he's going to attack, and this is real, our lives are really threatened here, let them only attack half. The other half, God willing, can run away and be safe. But that should give you a sense of just how real Jacob's fear is in this moment. And at that second, Jacob does something that you might not think to do. Think about the moments in life you felt an incredible fear. Think about the last time you were really afraid, maybe really afraid for your life, if you've ever had that moment. What did you do? What was
You prayed.
what was your first impulse? For some of us,
You
the
pray
first
for help.
For some of us, the first impulse is to try to solve it, to do anything we can, to learn and to figure out how to control the situation. For others, the first impulse is to simply offer a prayer, to say, I don't know what to do here. I need to turn to Hashem and get a little bit of help. And that's what Jacob does. I'll show you his prayer because it's one of the longest and most beautiful prayers in the Torah. And it's after that moment of prayer, of admitting his weakness, perhaps, and really asking for help, that his great transformation occurs and the name change and all that is to come from that. I'm going to read his prayer, but as I do, I want you to think about the language of this prayer. Is Jacob here truly offering his praise to God in a prayer that feels genuine? Or is he doing something else? Is he using God to get what he wants? Is he making God almost a player in this scheme that he has to be successful against Esav? You know, we have one way of thinking about prayer that I like to talk about, which is not my approach to prayer, but some have it, is the laundry list prayer. God, if you do X, Y, and Z for me, then I will believe in you. And if you don't, then I won't. Some people approach prayer in that way, as if God is just there to give and do for us what we want. And it seems like there's a little bit of that in Jacob's prayer, but let's look at it and you'll hear the tone. I want to hear what you think. Here's how he starts. In his moment of great fear, Vayomer Yaakov, Elohei Avi Avraham, God of my father Abraham, Elohei Avi Yitzchak, God of my father Isaac. Please, God who said to me, return to your native land and I will deal bountifully with you, the God who promised me all these good things in life and in the world. Here's where he starts to lay it on a little bit too thick, I think. Katonti mikol chasidim, he says, I am unworthy, I'm small before all of your acts of kindness, umikol ha'amet, and all of your truth that you have shown me. Hatzileni na, save me now, deliver me. Miyad achi, from the hand of my brother. Miyad Esav, from Esav's hand. Ki yar anochi oto, I'm deeply afraid of him. Pen yavo v'hikani em al banim, lest he's going to come and harm me and harm those who are with me, women and children. You, God, and this is still his prayer, who said to me, I will make your offspring as the sands of the sea and too numerous to count. You, God, I need you to protect me. I need you to save me. What is Jacob's argument here?
He's throwing back the same words that God gave him.
Who had that?
It's Jane.
Jane?
I think he's just throwing it back to God, saying, this is what you promised me. Now you have to, God has to live up to his end of the bargain.
I, Jacob, am supposed to be the third patriarch. The future of the Jewish people depends on me living. And you, God, promised that to me. And if Esav kills me in this moment, your promise will not come to pass because there will be no Jewish people. I'm the one who is supposed to give birth to the future of the Jewish people, the 12 tribes. And so, God, remember your promise.
Isn't it interesting, though, that he calls upon the God of his fathers and he doesn't call him his God?
Interesting in a lot of ways. Part of this prayer to me feels almost like Jacob buttering God up. You, God, who are so great, who made these promises to my ancestors, who is so filled with kindness and truth, and I'm so little in your eyes. Oh, you, please rescue me. And there's a sense in which, and I mentioned this before, a sense in which maybe Jacob is, I use the phrase, laying it on a little thick. He's giving a little bit too much praise as a way of getting God to then have the response that he wants. What do you think, though? Maybe someone else who hasn't spoken yet. Is this a prayer that feels genuine to you? Or is this the prayer of someone who really is just wants to get what he wants from God, and so he knows the right thing to say to God? Would you pray like this in your moment of fear? Let me hear from someone, maybe someone who hasn't spoken yet, while I take a sip of tea.
Yeah, I have a problem with believing this as it's written. I think that
Good.
Yaakov is being rather manipulative. If you take this standing on itself, it might be believable. But if you look at his history of being a familial shapeshifter of a type, it's very hard for me to think that he's really sincere. He's trying to get something from God.
I love that point. And that's really what I'm hoping to drive home in this class is this question of, has Jacob changed? Has he become a better person, or is he still that almost manipulative, the person who uses his cleverness to get what he wants, not just with other people, but with God? We saw earlier in the Torah, Jacob offered a conditional prayer to God, saying, God, if you give me what I want, I'll believe in you. And if you don't, well, then we'll see. And there is a little bit of that feeling left over here that I want us to be attentive to. So I appreciate that point. Though, let me remind you, Jacob, in all of his faults, is still the third patriarch of the Jewish people. And I want to be careful with how we describe him. All of our commentators look to Jacob and do their best to make him look good, to rescue him, even given his character traits that are a little bit less impressive, shall we say. Our commentators want him to succeed. They want him to be transformed because, again, he's the father really of the 12 tribes and the Jewish people. So if he's not a great person, well, what does that say about us? And our commentators are very sensitive to that fact. Did I see a hand? Yeah, jump in and then we're going to get to the wrestling. You're just on mute. Go for it.
Am I on?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay. Can we go for a minute backwards to the last verse that we saw? When Jacob is talking, he's asking God, he's saying to God, I am afraid because he might hit mother on children. He's not afraid of his own life, but he's afraid of mother and children that will be killed. And if we go back for a second to verse number 5, if you can just really quickly go back. I have a different opinion than everybody stated here. Based on the word ve'acher, in verse 5, Jacob says, I lived with Lavan, and acher means in Hebrew and differ. It's the verb from the word acher, which means, and I'm different until now. So it means I change, at least in his vision, he sees himself different than what he was before when he tricked his brother or whenever things happened between the two of them.
That is an amazing way to try to redeem Jacob. And it's a point that I should have made when we were at that verse. What did Jacob see when he lived with Laban? What kind of guy was Laban?
Was also a deceptive
He was
manipulator.
like Jacob in the sense that he was also a trickster. He was also deceptive. And could it
Right.
have been that when Jacob spent those years seeing that, he said, oh my gosh, that's what I've been like. I'm that guy and I don't want to be. And I can't continue to live in that way. And that time spent with Laban was what transformed him. Oh, did someone do a mark here? How do you turn that on? All right, so leave that. I need to figure out how to take off if someone does a mark. Anyway, so right. So that time with Laban made him realize. Here, hold on one sec. Rich, do you know how to? Oh,
Offhand, no.
Got it. Okay, good
Got
enough. Perfect. So that time with Laban, if you've ever experienced this, being with someone who has a character trait or a quality that you really don't like, and then you realize, I do that all the time, and now for the rest of your life, you want to say, well, I can't do that anymore, if that's what it looks like. If you're someone who gossips, you spend an afternoon with someone who gossips 10 times more than you ever do, you start to realize, well, that's what it sounds like. That's not who I want to be. And maybe that was part of Jacob's transformation. So let's look now at the wrestling, but thank you for that really sensitive read. And you're absolutely right. The word acher means other, different. Maybe Jacob was saying here, I'm different from that. Okay.
That's not necessarily, I disagree, because I think that he did not decide to leave Laban's household on his own. I think he was told that he should leave. I think there was, so I don't, I disagree with that interpretation.
So let me
Jacob, no, it was Jacob himself whose personality kind of changed. He admit that his personality was changed. I am not anymore what I used to be when I was tricking my brother and so on.
So let me jump
No, because he was tricking Laban too. Didn't he trick Laban when he separated the spotted and the speckled the sheep and all? He was still the same deceptive guy.
Hold it for 1 second. I want to jump in. So what we have here, class, is an example of the most beautiful thing you will ever see. It's called a machloket. And Torah study is about, more than anything else, disagreeing. The beauty of studying Torah is that we look at these verses, every single Jewish person, and see something different. So it's a good machloket. It's a good disagreement you're having. I don't want it to take our last 15 minutes because I want to get into the wrestling portion and the transformation. That having been said, anyone who wants to continue this conversation with me, anytime during the week, I live for it. I love it. Email me, call me, and let's talk.
Be sorry.
And let me also say one more thing. We will finish this class in 15 minutes with more questions than answers, and having barely scratched the surface. And that's the beauty of it. There will always be more to talk about in Torah. We'll come back to this every year, and there'll still be more to talk about. All right, here's the wrestling match. At this point, Jacob's filled with fear. It's our last 15 minutes. Jacob thinks that Esau's army is going to come and potentially kill him and his whole family. And it's the night before they're supposed to meet, and Jacob is left alone. And it comes out of nowhere. Vayivater Yaakov levado. Jacob is sitting alone by himself the night before. Ve'ye'avek ish imo adalot hashachar. When out of nowhere, an ish, what is an ish?
A man.
A man comes ve'ye'avek to wrestle with him. Two questions that are very, very complicated to answer. We're going to try. Question one, who is this man coming out of nowhere? Who is this?
Malach, an
An
angel.
angel, a guardian angel? Is it Jacob's own conscience? Is it something else? We don't know. Via avak,
Shabbat.
via avek, and they wrestled.
No,
What does it mean that they wrestled? Does it mean that they wrestled physically? Does it mean that they wrestled emotionally? Does it mean that they wrestled spiritually? We're going to try to understand, because this is a moment of real, a real defining moment in Jacob's life, and so in the life of the entire Jewish people. This is a transitional moment. Okay, they're wrestling. Some random person, some random angel. Let's see what Rashi has to say. There's kind of does everyone know Rashi, a medieval commentator? He gives kind of the basic understanding. He says that the word ye'avek, to wrestle, comes from the Aramaic word avak, not Aramaic, a Hebrew word, which means dust. Because when people would wrestle there where they were in a sandy place, they would kick up dust and it would fly everywhere, and that would be the wrestling. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that it's related to the Aramaic word aviku, which means connected or joined together. That somehow Jacob and this mysterious person were joined together in their wrestling. They were going back and forth. You almost couldn't tell which was which. Now, let me show you just two examples of how this is depicted in classical interpretations, because it helps to see some of the depictions, helps us to think about what's actually going on here. So this is one example of a more traditional interpretation. Everyone can see the image, right?
Mhm.
Of a more traditional interpretation of this moment. Jacob looks fierce. He looks strong. He looks like he's ready to battle with this angel. The angel's depicted in a very classical way, almost a Christian way, with these large wings. And this is an interpretation that I think goes along with the view that the angel, or this mysterious being, was a guardian angel of Esav. That's one famous interpretation. This being came to wrestle with Jacob on behalf of Esav, to try to fight with him, to try to harm him, to try to weaken him before the next morning. That's one possibility.
How do you know that it's from Asav?
Well, that's a possibility that our tradition brings up, that Rashi brings up. I'm going to
Okay.
show it to you in a second.
All right. All right.
One possibility. The second is one that I prefer, and it's, I think, demonstrated more in an image like this. Can everyone see?
Mhm.
What's the difference between this second image and the first one we saw? What's one of the things that stands out to you looking at this more modern interpretation of the story?
There's a little sadness in there, a little
Maybe a little remorse, maybe a little
something,
guilt.
something
I-
that's not strange.
No wings. He's wearing a helmet.
Looks
Okay.
more
anyone else?
introspective also.
Say again?
Looks more introspective.
Who said that?
Exactly.
Rossi, Lester.
Rossi. That's really what I get when I see this. And not only introspective, you can't tell the difference in this image between Jacob and the angel. It's almost as if you don't know where Jacob ends and the angel begins, or where the angel begins and Jacob ends.
They're intertwined.
They're intertwined. And that's, again, getting to that Aramaic understanding of the root, that they were joined together. It's more introspective. And to me, this really points us toward the interpretation that I favor, which is what Jacob was wrestling with in that moment was not an external angel, was not a guardian of Esav. He was wrestling with himself.
Right.
He was wrestling with his own conscience.
Yeah.
He was wrestling with the harm that he did Esav back when they were younger. And in doing that work of feeling the remorse and feeling that guilt and struggling with it, only in doing that would he be ready for the following morning. It's almost like, you can imagine, you're going to meet someone who you harmed. You're meeting
But
them
it's so
tomorrow.
close because they're twins and they were battling in the womb all
Yes.
together. This is a lifelong thing.
So don't
That
forget,
I think the
as Naomi's
duality is
bringing
there.
up, don't forget that wrestling was part of what Jacob and Esau did from the moment they were conceived.
That's what I said.
But I love that more introspective view, that what Jacob is really struggling here is himself. And you can imagine you're going to meet someone tomorrow at noon who you really did wrong to. And the night before you get into bed and you're looking at yourself and your actions and you're saying, wow, I really need to change. Or I'm glad I'm a different person now. I'm glad I've changed. I think that's what's going on here. So that's my read. And I'm going to show you to the end of the story, and then we'll end by just opening it up for our last 5 minutes of discussion. But I think that's the most helpful read for us, and I base that on the rest of the story. Look at what happens toward the end of the story. This is only 3 verses we get of this wrestling match. The first thing the Torah tells us is this, that when the angel saw that he had not prevailed, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket. He harmed Jacob at what's called in Hebrew the Gid Hanasheh, which is the sciatic nerve. Anyone who knows anything about sciatica, it's very, very painful. It affects the lower back and into the legs. According to this text, that's what the angel gave, in a sense, to Jacob, harming him there, making it really painful for him. And that happened as they wrestled. So the fact that Jacob was struggling with this and felt a little bit of pain, not just emotional pain, but physical pain, I think is important to keep in mind. When we have gone through something difficult in life, like Jacob is in this moment, even afterward, 5 years after, 10 years after, 20 years after, we hold on to some of that pain. We're never emerging from that completely unscathed. And we carry some of the pain of the conflicts that we've had in life with us. And Jacob's no exception. Here's how the story ends in our last 5 minutes, and then I'll open it up. Then he said, and I want you to pay very careful attention. This is probably the most complicated verse in the whole story. Vayomer, shalcheni ki Allah hashachar, let me go, because the dawn is breaking, the night is over. Vayomer lo, and he says to him, lo ashalechacha, I will not let you go, ki im berachtani, unless you bless me. What's going on here? I will not let you go unless you bless me. 2 possibilities, and I'll leave it to you to decide which one you favor. Possibility number 1 is that Jacob is a changed man. He has felt remorse for his actions, and now he is ready to bless the angel as a way of giving up that blessing that he stole all of those years ago, and saying, I didn't deserve this back then. I don't deserve it now. I will give up that blessing and humble myself so that my brother will forgive me. That's the generous read. Read number 2 is the exact opposite. It's Jacob saying, I won't let you go until you bless me, until you admit that I was right all along and that I deserve the blessing all along. And the text doesn't tell us which of the 2. It's up to us to decide how we view Jacob's character. But in any case, it's from this moment that Jacob is given his new name. And it's the name that we are called. This is the last verse we'll see tonight. Said he, your name shall no longer be Jacob, after this wrestling match, whatever it meant, but Israel.
See?
Ki im Yisrael, And we're called Bnei Yisrael, the people of Israel. This is where our name comes from. If you ever wondered why we're Bnei Yisrael, this is it. And the angel gives an explanation. Ki sarita im Elohim ve'im anashim vetuchal. For you have wrestled with divine and human. You have struggled and you have prevailed. And the meaning of the name Yisrael, when we call ourselves the people of Israel, the meaning of that name is the ones who struggle and prevail, the ones who engage in conflict for the sake of, God willing, becoming better, becoming stronger, growing as people, and the ones who succeed. And that's where we get our name, from this very moment, which is something that's so beautiful to hold on to. Now, I'll stop for a moment. I went a little fast through that story. I want to open it up. What do you see in this story? Do you see a Jacob who's wrestling with himself and learning how to become a better person? Or do you see something else? Do you see an angel that's coming to defend Jacob and just to harm him and destroy him? Because both are possibilities. What do you think? And then we'll wrap up.
I see someone who is struggling with the strength of his being able to manipulate, as well as his strength to be able to know that it's not exactly the right way to go, but, and then we go on from there.
Yeah, nice. And don't forget, by the way, it doesn't mean that Jacob is perfect. Just because he's had a transformation and his name becomes Yisrael, the Torah still calls him very often Yaakov, because he has moments when he's living up to his higher calling, and he has moments when he's much closer to his lower nature. And we're all like that. We don't get to always live our best selves. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? That was a beautiful one.
I think that the story is in here and in this manner to show that he is struggling with himself, that and it's a terrible, terrible kind of a life-changing thing. And it doesn't say that he'll always be perfect, but he will be able, he will be able to handle it. He will be able to have this struggle within himself and hopefully to do the right thing and to change. I think that's just a very beautiful pasuk here.
It's inspiring. You know, the traditional read, and I'll just throw this out there because no one's mentioned it yet, is the read that is historical. Esav comes to represent non-Jewish nations that wanted to destroy us. Esav comes to represent historically anti-Semitism. And the story of Jacob prevailing in the mind of many of our commentators is the story of the Jewish people surviving despite the threats that we've faced historically. No one's mentioned that yet, but that's there as well.
But you know what, also, I think,
Yeah.
even Israel, you know, the nation of Israel struggles. It has so many, you know, even though it's a modern miracle, they have so many struggles between rich and poor, black and white, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, kosher. You know, it's still struggling. But what does the song say? That what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. So we will survive.
It's a nice way to conclude. So unless there are any other final thoughts, I want to take what you said and hopefully turn it into a blessing. But before I do, I don't want to keep anyone else from offering a final thought or a perspective. Someone who hasn't spoken maybe on something in this story that surprised you, or something that you're taking away from it.
I might be off base.
Yeah.
Okay, Abraham was tested, and I think Jacob is being tested.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the matriarchs, again and again, the stories of Bereshit, the stories of Genesis, are stories about people facing challenges, people who were not perfect, though they were great and though they did their best, they were not perfect, but they faced a lot, each of them in different ways. And the stories in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Torah, are meant to inspire us in that way, meant to remind us that in all the challenges that we face in life, and all of the family conflicts that we face, and all of the interpersonal conflicts, and everything else that we face, we might not have the best or perfect answer, but we are called upon to try and to strive to be holy and to strive to be good. If there is a single message to take away from the whole book of Genesis, I think it's that. And when we pray, invoking the names of our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, that's what we remind ourselves. That if they were able to face what they faced and somehow succeed because of their courage and their faith, we should try to do the same. That we shouldn't give up, that we shouldn't get discouraged. And so that's a beautiful way to end. I thank everyone for being a part of this Torah study. We're going to continue along these lines because for the next few weeks, as we finish the Joseph story and into Exodus, into Shemot, the Moses story, we have some of the most rich and beautiful narratives in the entire Torah. So I'd like to really continue along these lines with this class. And then once we get to Leviticus, once we get to sections that are more about sacrifice and other things, maybe we'll switch to a different topic. I'll get a sense of the class at that point. Maybe we'll want to switch to something else. But for these few weeks, we really have a privilege of studying some of the most remarkable material in our heritage. And so we'll continue along these lines. Thanking everyone for being a part of this, for sharing, for getting something out of it. I hope, and if you want to continue the conversation, I'll say it again, reach out to me and let's continue. I can send resources, I can send links to articles, and really this is what I love. So happy to do that. And the last thing I'll say is that as a blessing, we should all live up to our name, Yisrael, the people who face struggles and challenges and yet find the courage and the faith to prevail. And these are challenging times. I don't have to go into why they are. We all know that they are. But I hope that you found some inspiration in Jacob's life, and that inspiration will carry you through this week and into Shabbat and into Hanukkah until we meet again. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.